Box office top 10.
Yes.
Okay, so before we do that, Joy. So we'll talk more Joy later with Thomas and Mackenzie. But anyway, this is an anonymous email.
Okay.
Mark and Simon, I was lucky enough to get tickets to the premiere of Joy as part of the London Film Festival. And we're doing it now because it's Netflix. And so therefore, as you said, Mark, many times, they don't release the figures.
Yeah.
So I saw it as part of the London Film Festival and found the film thoroughly affecting. As Mark said in his review, it's a relatively small film, which made seeing it at a packed house at the Royal Festival Hall a little odd, but it tells an important story which seems to be largely unknown. In this country, at least, we now treat fertility treatment as something perfectly normal. Yeah. But to see how it came about and the reactions it prompted at the time was really moving. Sadly, we're also used to hearing that women's roles across society have too often been airbrushed away by history. So any chance to highlight stories like that of Jean Purdy, played by the excellent Thomasin McKenzie, see later for more details, should be seen by as many people as possible. My own reaction to the film was clearly heightened by the fact that I and hundreds of thousands of others before me have the work of Purdy, Edwards and Steptoe to thank for my own two daughters. Knowing that Louise Brown, the first test tube baby, was in the audience probably didn't help my eye leakage. Or should there be flood? However, I did worry that for others with less personal stories, the film might fall flatter. So it was great to hear that Mark also had a strong reaction, albeit for different reasons. Yeah. Yours anonymously, name withheld, as we've not talked to our kids about this. And while I have no shame about it, I don't really want them to find out through your otherwise excellent podcast. Imagine you're listening. Really? Is that us? Anyway, so thank you, Anonymous.
Thank you.
That's appreciated.
I'm really glad you liked it because I think it is a very powerful film. And I talked to James Norton on Monday when I was I do a monthly show at the BFI. And he was saying, of course, because the film was in development for a very long time. So the thing that I was talking about it's more relevant than ever now. He said, of course, that is completely accidental. It just happens to have come out in the middle of a period when this stuff is very much in the news because of all the craziness in America. But it's the universal story about women being written out of history and having to be written back into it, which is really the sort of the core of the drama, which is very well written by your mate Jack Thorne. I think that message is timeless.
More with Thomas and Mackenzie later. So in the top 10, at 10 here and in the States, is Honora. Now, before Mark speaks on this, because you have spoken, an interesting email from Rachel Logan, BA Hons, MA, barrister at law, and energy sucked out geriatric vessel to a developing human we hope grows up in a better world for women. Okay. Dear Mark and Simon, heavily pregnant and excited for a rare evening of actually feeling up to venturing out off the sofa with my fiancé. I feel the need to write my first email in 20-ish years of LTL life. So this is it. Okay. Mark, you described Honora, or the filmmaker, as human. I think, did you say humanist? And then I said, humanist. What do you mean by humanist?
Yes.
I think that's right. Yeah. Rachel says, I found it painfully, deeply, uncomfortably male.
Okay.
The moment and I've left out some of this email because it is, as Rachel admits, quite spoilery. But anyway, we'll get to the gist of it. The moment the fantastical tipped into the misogynist was the awful one where we were expected to laugh at the prospect of a young woman in her underwear, confronted by violent strangers inside her new home, abandoned, fighting back, in quotes, crazily, while the hapless idiots tried to reassure her, tie her up, subdue her, and are found in a position clearly suggestive to the next strange man walking in of intended rape. All supposedly some kind of entertaining farce because the men, in quotes, didn't want to hurt her, but her refusal to behave calmly in the face of fear what they were causing meant they got injured whilst assaulting her. It was horribly painful to watch, as was the hilarity of many of those in the screening. From there on in, it carried on in the same vein. I didn't get inner strength, empowerment, a woman pursuing what she wants. I got a woman being controlled by violent men doing her best to survive a horrid long quest, again played for humour based on their apparent uselessness and her competence and strength, but without communicating any sense of the nastiness and vulnerability in the setup. The scene at the end felt like the ultimate dark male fantasy. I just can't understand all the positive responses to this film. My partner and I left the screening feeling unexpectedly angry rather than uplifted, and pretty disappointed in what is presented as feminist human filmmaking in today's society? Yours in frustration, Rachel Logan.
Okay, can I answer that directly? Which is, I don't think that scene is played for laughs. That doesn't mean, now, if you were in a screening in which people were laughing, that is a different thing. But I don't think I watched the film on my own in a cinema, and I thought that scene when the guys come into the apartment was absolutely terrifying, like genuinely terrifying. And I didn't think it was funny at all. And I don't think it is played for laughs. I can imagine that if you're in a screening and everyone is finding it hilariously funny and you're feeling what I was feeling, that must have been deeply uncomfortable. But I don't think that's the filmmaker's intention, and I don't think that's how that scene was designed or how it plays out. There is no accounting for the way that people react to things, and I absolutely respect your opinion, and it's a perfectly fair take. But I don't think that's how that scene was played, and that is absolutely not how I read it. I watched that scene with my hand over my eyes virtually because I had no idea where it was going.
So the line where Rachel says she found it painfully, deeply, uncomfortably male.
Yes.
And that the scene at the end, which we don't need to mention, felt like the ultimate dark male fantasy. They sound very kind of specific criticisms of not just how it was being taken in the cinema, but the film itself.
Yes, I don't feel that way about it. One of the things that Sean Baker has always done is to work very, very closely with, for example, in this case, sex work advice from somebody who actually really knows what they're talking about. And I don't see that as a male gaze thing. I actually think of all the modern filmmakers I can think of, I think his gaze is the least guilty of that. Now, I'm not saying you can't see it like that, but let's talk specifically about that scene, when they break into the house. I did not read that in that way, and I don't think the film intends it in that way. That is not to say that clearly, if you were there and everyone was laughing at it, I'm kind of slightly surprised because, but I've been in screenings of The Exorcist in which people have laughed, and that just baffles me. And I understand people can just find that stuff funny, and I don't.
Number 9 is Kanguva, a new entry.
So not press screened. This is Indian Tamil language epic fantasy action film, apparently the first of 2 parts. All I can tell you is it has not been received well by the critics in its domestic release, but they haven't showed it to us here. So if anyone's seen it, let us know.
Number 8 is The Last Dance. It's a new entry. Ollie Friedman says, Dear Karachala and Geeta, I just saw The Last Dance. Incidentally, the second film with that title in recent weeks, though regrettably no Venom horse this time, after hearing Mark's review. Although I found it hard to completely wrap my arms around, with characters that are dropped from large stretches of the film and huge variance in tone, from open-hearted earnestness to farce to truly viscerally upsetting, its transporting final crescendo leaves a shining afterglow that forgives this unevenness.
Yes, it's an interesting thing. Again, if we're talking about humor, I've seen The Last Dance described as a comedy, and I don't get that. There are things in it that are passingly funny, but there are also things in it that are absolutely horrifically tragic, and I know exactly which scene I think the emailer is referring to. I thought it is definitely tonally very strange. As I was saying when I reviewed it, it shifts from one register to another with gay abandon, but I think it does in the end have something profound to say about the fact that the rituals of death are for the living. And also I think it has something profoundly feminist to say about the way in which the sort of chauvinism of society still basically delineates certain things as male and certain things as female, the emphasis being one higher and one lower. And actually, as the drama moves on, it becomes more and more about a woman finding her space in the world. And so I liked it. I'm just been surprised by people describing it as a comedy, because it ain't a comedy, although it does have some jokes in it.
Number 7 is Small Things Like These.
And the smallest thing is the register of Cillian Murphy's facial expressions, which are tiny and yet somehow kind of cause emotional earthquakes. He may have the best movie acting face of his generation. So Michael Caine famously did that talk in which he talked about the difference between theatre acting, television acting, and cinema acting. And he was saying the thing with cinema acting is in a close-up, you have to do very, very little because your face is like 100 feet tall on the screen. And Cillian Murphy is clearly from that school of acting.
Number 5 in America, 6 here is The Wild Robot.
Looks great, melancholic, shades of Silent Running, a little bit of The Iron Giant. I liked it, and it's gone down very well with family audiences.
5 here, 2 in the States, Venom, and the other,
The Last Dance. Yeah. It would be interesting if somebody was going to see the other, The Last Dance, and they walked into Venom, The Last Dance with its space horses. I have no idea what they would make of it. It's a complete car crash of a film, but it's taking, a bunch of money.
Heretic is at number 4.
Hugh Grant. Has Hugh Grant ever been better than he is now? I think the answer to that question is no. He is in the golden age of his career, and he's great in this. I mean, the film struggles a little bit in its last act, but he is absolutely relishing the possibility, the chances, as he has been doing in the other film, the Paddington film as well, to play with that idea of, he comes across as a nice guy. But there's a lovely thing in Paddington 2 when he was being interviewed about Paddington 2. He said, yes, they needed a shallow, self-obsessed actor, and for some reason they came to me, which I thought was very funny.
US number 1, number 3 here is Red One. Okay. Paddington in Peru is at number 2.
Yeah. Could do with more Sanj. We're all agreed.
Always.
What Paddington in Peru needs is more Sanj. So if they're going to make a 4th one, can we make it Paddington and Sanj?
Gladiator 2 is the UK's number 1, and some correspondence to that effect. Hal says, it looks glorious from start to finish. The performances are all very worthy, almost to a fault, with, of course, Denzel not just stealing the show, but stuffing it in a sandwich and eating it along with the scenery. The main plot was, however, clunky and almost ham-fisted. The story beats were predictable, the characters staying firmly in their lanes. Thankfully, the B-plot of Rome's further descent into sycophancy was excellent, far more interesting and subtle. This saved the movie from being only mildly interesting and made it certainly worth the watch. Thank you, Hal.
Yeah.
Jake says, Dear Weird Twin and Weirder Twin, last night I went to watch Gladiator 2 and I was impressed. I cannot think of another sequel in history that was so bad it actually made the first film worse. The first film was action-packed with a simple and compelling story arc. It was a film about revenge and retribution. A reluctant hero who was a loyal and honorable family man who is fighting against the power-hungry, envious antagonist in Commodus. Emphasis on that pronunciation. Maximus was driven by the death of his son and wife. Commodus was driven by his sense of inadequacy, as he never lived up to his father's expectations. Simple and effective character motivations. In Gladiator 2, attempts were made to build Lucius into the image of Maximus, yet Lucius's motivation jumped around depending on whether someone called him by his real name or the weird name that he chose. Macrinus wanted to be the leader of Rome, but he also wanted it to burn. The two weird emperors were poorly developed clowns with zero depth or nuance. Details were added late into the movie for plot convenience. There were characters that were introduced and quickly disposed of without any development. The CGI was poor, the costumes looked like costumes, the extras looked bored, and the sharks made no sense. The worst thing, though, was that Gladiator 2 undermined the premise of Gladiator 1. Lucius's background entirely undermined Maximus as the dedicated father and husband. Lucilla's decision to release Lucius into the wild undermined the whole climax of the previous film. It literally rendered Maximus's death futile. A well-worked storyline over the course of a fantastic film was completely unraveled by poor writing 24 years later. Why did they bother making this film? What a waste of time and money. Thank you, says Jake. P.S. What we do in life echoes in eternity versus this is about survival, survive. Also, death smiles on us all. All we can do is smile back. Or if you find yourself alone riding in green fields with the sun on your face, do not be troubled, for you are in Elysian and you are already dear. Versus, where we are, death is not. Which I agree was a little bit disappointing. Paul says, I thought Russell Crowe's hand at the end of the film gave a better performance than Paul Mescal. We are led to believe rage is Lucius's gift, yet that never comes across. Perhaps Minimus would have been a better name for his character. Supposedly, Ridley Scott shot the movie in 51 days, which is true, as what you heard on the show last week. Perhaps if he spent more time on it, it would have been better. Denzel was the highlight, but he's been in much better films. Less than zero interest in a third installment of this. Thank you, Paul. And Chris in Chelmsford. Dear Dr. 1 and Dr. 2, having just left the cinema after viewing Gladiator 2, I need to write with respect to your comments about the dog monkey creatures in the film.
Yes.
They were baboons, and having been attacked by a baboon, aged 7, whilst living in Zambia, this is about 40 years ago, and it ripped out a very large quantity of my hair, I can attest how vicious and phenomenally strong these creatures are. Have you ever looked online to see the size of a baboon's jaw and its teeth? Thank you, Chris in Chelmsford. The redactor has added a note here because he couldn't be bothered to actually be on the show today.
Yes.
In an interview with Deadline, Sir Ridley revealed that a primate interaction in a South African car park inspired the creatures on Gladiator 2. Quote, a little gambling troop of baboons came across the wall and sit on the wall, staring at the tourist. The idiot in question apparently went over to a big one and tried to pet it like an idiot when this thing attacked him. And he's a big man. The guy dropped his coffee, ran for the car, getting clawed as he struggled to get in the car. I thought that was funny, but I knew every actor had to do the physicality of the movement or of defend, kill, and or attack, right? So they're not dog monkeys. They are, in fact, officially baboons. But I think the point that they're space baboons.
They're space monkeys.
They're clearly not proper baboons. They look like they've been bred with dogs.
Yes, I mean, I don't doubt for 1 minute that baboons are fiercely dangerous, and it sounds like a horrific experience you had with them. Those things that are in that film are space monkeys. I'm sorry. I mean, they may technically be baboons, but they are space monkeys. Also, in answer to the question, why on earth did they make this? 87 million opening weekend, breaking Ridley Scott's previous record. That's why they made it. Like I said, I don't think that it's there because it's got an advanced narrative. As we said when we were reviewing it, it went through so many narratives, and in the end, it was just like, okay, let's bolt all these bits together to make the thing work. I still would have paid good money to see the Nick Cave, Russell Crowe goes to purgatory and gets sent back to Earth to kill Christ story. Although, as Russell said, don't like it, mate. But I enjoyed Gladiator for what it is, which is its big, spectacular popcorn entertainment with Paul Mescal and space monkeys and sharks, which seem to have been put there largely because they were in a meeting and they went, what have you got? Monkeys, ships, sharks? All right.
I have read quite a few reviewers, not that I pay any attention to any reviewers other than you, just saying the point that we mentioned last week. It's tempting fate to put sharks in your movie when sharks are not necessary. They might not even known anything about sharks. So, I think that would have been, anyway, because people are going to put in the inevitable phrase. Anyway, so that's the box office top 10.